Of all the sports cars that have ever journeyed from concept to consummation, perhaps the most idolized and mythologized is the Shelby Cobra. Dreamed up by the charismatic Carroll Shelby, who stylishly finessed platforms from AC in England and engines from the Ford Motor Company, the Cobra was brutishly powerful, devilishly unpredictable, and after its second attempt, the World GT Champion in 1965. The Cobra legacy has been endlessly retold and unfailingly preserved as a piece of nonfiction that could have just as easily been the creation of an overstimulated imagination. Yet the record is clear. Between 1963 and 1967, the heart of what we now call the muscle car era, nothing from Detroit accelerated faster, won more races, or flaunted its unmatched athleticism like the Cobra. Not even the Corvette, a car which had always been a compromise between raw performance and more genteel passenger accommodations, could generate the same kind of gut-slamming emotionalism that driving a Cobra poured out in heavy doses. When the Cobra was unceremoniously chopped from Ford's lineup at the end of the 1967 model year, suddenly a void was created that no manufacturer was either willing or able to fill. The 1970s was a period of street-level survivalism for America's auto builders. Imports were flooding the marketplace, and with oil embargoes, safety legislation hotly debated and pushed through in Washington, and the domestic economy rubbery in the knees, inexpensive cars with good mileage and reassuring crashworthiness were the hot sellers. By the early 1980s, Chrysler was drowning in red ink, unable to cash in on the buying trends touched off by the Japanese. But thanks to the adventurous corporate footwork of Lee Iacocca, a hefty bailout by Uncle Sam, and the clever versatility of the Pentastar's K-cars and derivative minivans, the late 1980s saw a new spirit of inventive optimism echo through the Chrysler Corporation. Even their acquisition of the Jeep and Eagle division of AMC promised better times ahead. This is Chrysler's Newmark Avenue assembly plant in Detroit, Michigan. Since 1992, it's been the starting point for production of Dodge's remarkable Viper RT10 Roadster, and more recently, the Viper GTS Coupe. Unlike the more common assembly lines scattered throughout the Motor City, Viper production is much less automated and relies on a high percentage of hand assembly to build this enormously powerful automobile. And like its manner of assembly, the Viper's bold story of how it was first conceived and eventually brought to reality is also vastly different from the trails that are usually followed by new cars born in Detroit. The Viper jumped into the jarring vacuum that streamed through the automotive industry with the departure of Shelby's Cobra, and brought with it several new dimensions in not only performance, but in how automobiles are built, and how one car could almost single-handedly reverse the soft-in-the-middle image of the country's number 3 car maker. This is the Viper. The snake strikes twice. Within the automotive industry, there are several showcase events in which the media, consumers, and executives from competing marques all collectively hobnob and mingle as the world's automobile manufacturers unveil new concepts and ideas. International auto shows, most notably the North American Auto Show held each January in Detroit itself, are glittering and glamorous expos of extreme marketing, designed to shell-shock all in attendance with light, color, and sound. The corporate decision-makers may not willingly admit it, but whether or not something fresh from the drawing board gets serious consideration for production is many times tied to the overall response it receives here in the unsheltered glare of public opinion. At the 1989 Detroit show, Chrysler pulled the carpet out from under every other manufacturer in the building with the public debut of a low, muscular, menacing roadster, powered by a 488 cubic inch V10 aluminum alloy engine, producing 400 horsepower, with huge wheels and tires tucked under bulging hyperbolic fenders, all representing a total cross-vector to the direction that Detroit's think tanks had been marshaling themselves for 2.5 decades. And its name was as subtle as cluster lightning, the Viper. Long before the Viper celebrated its coming-out party, there had been a passel of informal conversations bouncing from stylist to engineer to powertrain specialist throughout Chrysler's corridors as early as 1987. At the time, Chrysler's corporate image was staked heavily on the series of down-market sedans and station wagons utilizing a durable 2.2-liter four-cylinder engine, front-wheel drive, and an occasional turbocharger. The K cars had sold well, so well in fact that they shoveled enough cash flow into Chrysler to move forward on their next stroke of automotive genius, the minivan. But other than a few dressed-up front drivers with some moderately increased power, some by way of Carroll Shelby, who was now a Chrysler consultant, Chrysler was hopelessly unsexy as performance was once again beginning to set the tempo in Detroit. Tom Gale, Chrysler Vice President of Product Planning, was part of the company's design team in 1988 and recalls a significant conversation he had with Chrysler President Bob Lutz.
There were lots of discussions over a period of maybe even a year or two, and I can remember Bob Lutz and myself and Carroll Shelby and a number of others always having this interest or this passion in recreating something that had the feel of the mid-60s Cobra. And the date that I remember and the date that sticks in my mind more than anything else is in February of 1988. Bob Lutz and I were walking back from a meeting that was down in the boardroom complex down in our Highland Park area then, before we'd ever moved to this tech center. And Bob says, well, just stop in. He says, I want to talk with you, chat with you about basically a Cobra-inspired project. And so we stopped in the office. It was about a 5-minute meeting, and that was really when it was kicked off. That was in February of 1988, so we went to work. We went back. I never said another word to Bob. I came back, and it was about 3 weeks later, and we had a package and sketches, and because we'd already been kicking around some ideas, and we had done some work, and even that initial package had the V10 layout. It had pretty much the package configuration of the initial concept car.
Detroit has never been known to break into a full gallop when formalizing a new car concept. Too many layers of management and almost fanatical reliance on market surveys and product feasibility studies create a labyrinth of corporate speed bumps. But after Gale's discussions with Lutz, the design team at Chrysler quickly geared up and sketched out what they interpreted was the general direction in which this new age sports car, with an emphasis on Shelby's legendary classic, would be headed.
We invited him back in 3 weeks, and he was just blown away, and just was enthusiastic, as Bob always was. And of course, that was great for us because we'd been kind of wanting to do this for a long time, and this had been something that had been back burner. And so I just decided we were going to move it out of the closet, and so we never said another word then after that session. And 3 weeks later, I invited him out to an off-site location that we had, and we had a complete clay model already started of the vehicle. And that was what really got us on the road and rolling. And of course, January of '89, we debuted the first concept car at the Detroit Auto Show, and that was really what got the ball rolling for Viper.
Everyone was in agreement that the Viper, if it was to be built at all, would have to offer the wildest ride that money could buy.
Mr. Lutz, Gale, Carroll Shelby, and possibly other people just got in a room and decided that they were looking for an image car for Dodge. And they had to have the fastest, best accelerating, best stopping car possibly in the world, but definitely built in America, and that's where the whole thing started.
In any sports car, what lies under the hood has as much to do with its appeal as any other factor. Ferraris had long capitalized on their multi-cam, multi-carbureted V12 engines to lay title claim to their enduring invincibility. Shelby's first instinct was to push for a big cube American V8 to power the Viper. But Lutz, Gale, and Castang favored a new V10 engine being readied for production in the Dodge Ram pickups. 8 liters, or 488 cubic inches, infinite reserves of torque, and potentially producible with an aluminum alloy block. Shelby didn't need much more convincing. To him, bigger had always been better.
Well, you know, when I first learned of the project, I was actually working for Carroll Shelby out on the West Coast at Shelby Automobiles. I was doing the technical work for Carroll out there, and one day he said, come on, John, let's go down to the Pacifica, which is Chrysler's studio out on the West Coast, and they got a new car they want us to look at. And I went down there and I saw the first clay of the Viper, and it was absolutely amazing. Really, at the time, it was a little bit bigger than what it's ended up being, and it was a little bit more rounded and curved, but it was just an awesome and unique vehicle. And when I first saw it, I said, God, this company back in those days, I wasn't sure whether we'd really do it. And so it was unbelievable when Mr. Lutz, and he was really the key force behind the car, said, hey, we are really going to take a shot at this thing.
Construction of a Viper prototype with the express purpose of appearing at the upcoming season's international auto shows from coast to coast got underway in May of 1988. Long before full production had even been considered, the Viper was pulling together the entire scope of resources at Chrysler, a phenomenon that was about to influence almost every facet of the way the company was to do business.
The styling team, when we started the concept car, was very freely done. Neil Walling's group, we had a young man who we assigned out in the off-site shop when we started the clay model. We've gotten him started on some of the sketching. We had a small group of technical people behind him doing some of the packaging, and behind Neil doing some of that work. And it was very exciting. I mean, it was nice to come in and see it and really just encourage it, not try to bend it or change it or anything else. Just let it go from a creative perspective to see what we could get. And of course, the inspiration was that Cobra. How could you get it to have that essence, yet be very contemporary? And people have looked at it and they said, well, gee, that's retro. And retro in a way is a word I don't really care for, because to me it has almost a negative connotation. It shouldn't, but it does to me. And what we were always trying to do was have it so that the average person would recognize what we were trying to do, yet when you got it out and you set it next to a Cobra or whatever, I mean, the two things are entirely different, very different.
As the 1989 North American Auto Show opened in Detroit, the future of the Viper was about to rest squarely in the hands of the press and the public at large. Chrysler was about to test the world's readiness to accept a car so daringly brash from a company which for a long time had seemed to be permanently removed from the performance universe. January 1989, showtime for the Viper. Those at Chrysler who had logged countless hours nurturing and wet nursing this insolent gatecrasher would now nervously await the verdict. They needn't have worried. The response was swift and beyond all expectations.
Well, there was always risks, and there's always pros and cons. There were many people who were as passionate about not doing it as there were doing it. Of course, you can imagine that with any decision in a major company like this. But I have to say, in the case of Viper, it was very unique, because Viper, once we had gotten past the initial response, which was overwhelming. When the concept car first hit, I don't think anybody was really prepared for the response. I mean, we thought it was going to be great, and you always go into these projects hoping that's going to be the case. But this one was really special. The passion, the excitement, the enthusiasm that came back from the general populace was just enormous. I mean, we had so many letters. We had people that would send money and checks, and we would return them, of course. But there was always that enthusiasm for the project that you just couldn't deny. And so we finally said, now it's time to get serious. We're going to get together a team and talk about the production of it. I mean, it was one thing to do the concept car, and that was an effort in itself. But it really didn't start getting the real heavy pros and cons until after we had the concept car and we really decided now, okay, how are we going to figure out a way to do low volume niche production? This was something we hadn't done for years. Really no one in this country has done anything like that to any great extent anyway.
Chrysler knew a hit when it saw one. Almost immediately, plans were set into place for the production of the Viper. The blueprints for the Viper's future were steadily molded into shape, with the ultimate goal being a limited run of 200-plus cars offered as 1992 models. There was much to do to convert a show-stopping prototype into a real-world production exotic. Soon, the team concept was born at Chrysler.
And one of the things that Viper wanted to do, and in specialty vehicles we've been trying to do this in every program, Prowler has followed along in the footsteps of Viper, is to try some organizational experiments. And the big organizational experiment we tried with the Viper was a team approach to doing things, where we had all of the extended members of the team, which would be finance, marketing, public relations, who all lived right with us in the same basic area, and we were all one big, I don't want to say happy family all the time, but it allowed us to do a lot of things that with organizational chimneys sometimes you can't do. In fact, the team approach that Viper used really led to the founding of the platform groups that we now have throughout the corporation, as well as the idea of people empowerment, where we're starting to push responsibility down to the lowest levels in the company. And it's amazing, you do that and people really do step up and assume their responsibility and get the job done.
In many respects, Viper became the symbol for what we were trying to do with the culture inside our company. And I would submit to you that symbol of what we were trying to do with the company was probably as important and maybe even more important than the product itself. I've often said that, and most people don't realize that we had done this more to learn about what we were going to do with teamwork, what we were going to do with platform teams, more to have this be just a very small prototype of what we were looking to do in a much larger sense within the company. So Viper was very, very significant in the way we operate as a company.
When we first decided to do the Viper, we had kind of, we thought, a secret meeting with Bob Lutz, and we invited about 50 people to the meeting, kind of all of the enthusiastic car nuts that we had within the company. And we got to the meeting and actually 350 people showed up because the grapevine got going and the underground got going, and so we had a lot more people show up for the interviews, if you will, than we needed.
Die-hard automobile enthusiasts were unanimously delirious when national publications shouted the news that the Viper was on its way to production. But skeptics were quick to point out that a car like the Viper would certainly undergo noticeable changes in style, drivetrain, and concept as it made its way from turntable star to showroom reality. It was up to Chrysler to preserve the look and flavor of the car that owed its very existence to the adoring public.
That response, with people writing you letters, and I mean very passionate letters. I mean, people that sit down and take the time to write, generally have something on their mind, either positive or negative, and in this case it was just overwhelmingly positive, encouraging us to do this thing. And of course, when you look back at the image of our company at that time and the products that we produced, and then to have something like this, it really did help transform the image of the company to some extent as being somewhat more innovative. It helped us along the way to becoming somewhat more of a design leader, perhaps. I think it helped us along the way to establishing some credibility with a group of people that are very passionate about their automobiles, maybe even consider some of our products in other areas. And I have to tell you, when you go back and you look at those people that wrote in early, and then you look at all the followers during the program, I think it probably has helped us in many respects with some of our other products. The interesting thing is that the essence of that concept car is still there. As a matter of fact, it didn't really get watered down through the production phase and through all the feasibility and all the things we had to do. I would argue that it actually got better. It actually was stronger to the original concept than perhaps what that original concept is today. When I go back and look at the original concept car with the very radical windshield and integrated mirrors and things. It doesn't look as good to me today as what the car did, or what the car does. And then of course it's evolved over time. Now we have a coupe model. Now we have a lot of other variants of the model, and it's just continually gotten better. And I think that's testimony to a good team of designers, but also a good team of the platform folks and the engineering side who have really had the enthusiasm to bring it off and preserve that initial concept.
True to the image that had been forged by the Cobra 25 years earlier, the Viper was as minimalist a device as Detroit had ever seen. No side windows, no exterior door handles, no glitzy instrument cluster, or even air conditioning. As someone on Team Viper was reported to have said, all steak, all sizzle, no starchy filler.
If you want to go back to the original prototypes, they didn't even have roofs. And then there was a lot of internal bickering that it at least should have a roof of some kind. So when the cars came to production, they did have roofs, they did have pop-in side curtains. A definite disadvantage to the person that wants to use the car day in and day out. They're a little bit of trouble as far as to install them and pop them in, but I'll tell you, the car itself and the excitement of the car far overcomes the side curtains and the roof. Later in production, they came out with a hardtop for that car. There are aftermarket companies that have full plexiglass pop-in windows that are a lot nicer to use with that car. But in 1997, they came out with power windows. Something maybe they should have done back in 1992, but did not. Only the consumer knows at this point.
Any new car, regardless of its make or model, travels a complicated path as it moves from prototype to product. There must be adjustments, modifications, and long hours of test miles devoted to eliminating any design flaws or engineering rough edges long before the vehicle is ready for market. A tough enough task when the car in question has unlimited corporate resources, as was the case with Ford's new generation Taurus. But the Viper would have to make its way to the buying public in a much less extravagant way.
I think the biggest challenge in the Viper, as far as the underpinnings went, was to, with the investment we had, mix a bunch of components that we take off other production vehicles, yet get the kind of sports car that we were looking for. So we kind of had to look through the corporate parts bin, if you will, take the parts that we felt we could use on a Viper, and then we had to make up the rest of them. And I think for the guys that was a big challenge because they weren't allowed to start in some cases with a clean sheet of paper. We had a certain investment goals that we had to meet from senior management, which were significantly less than a typical program. So the guys had to be pretty ingenious in terms of picking and selecting parts that were in the parts bin and then doing new parts. And I think if you've driven the car, they've done a fairly good job there. We've got obviously rave reviews on the handling and the ride of the car.
Well, there were countless obstacles, and almost all of them were major because you had to find, first of all, a new process to do this. We didn't have a process for building a very low volume production vehicle. Not to mention, we didn't have the 10-cylinder engine we wanted. We didn't have almost any component that you could name, and so that meant we had to scour and scrounge and become very, very creative. There were obstacles down to how can you afford to tool things like a side marker lamp or another element of the vehicle. So we would go off and raid our parts bin or someone else's parts bin. It didn't matter. We would go in and try to find anything, and that was sort of the rules of the game. Anything was fair. And I think that also engendered this creative spirit that's always been there with the Viper team, and it continues today, right down to the people that are craftspersons that are putting that vehicle together. When you go down to that plant and you talk to the people, that spirit is just pervasive, and I think it's incumbent upon management to make sure that we support that and keep that alive, because that's what keeps projects like this to the point where they're going to be viable and successful.
In April of 1990, Viper prototype VM02 was completed. A test mule was to come the closest to revealing what the first regular production Viper would deliver in performance and appearance. It was the first prototype to bear the Chrysler V10 engine, although this one was cast iron. But the tubular steel chassis, fiberglass body, and fully independent suspension were accurate indications of how showroom Vipers would be constructed.
When we finished the first prototype car, and Roy Schoberg, who was leading the program at the time, called up Mr. Lutz and said, gee, you know, we just got the first car done and we'd like to have you kind of come over and look at it. And of course the guys had just got done building this car. We hadn't really tried the car out. And Mr. Lutz came over and he wrung it out at about 10 tenths, and we're all kind of sitting there cringing, hoping the car doesn't break and he doesn't kill himself out there. So we had a pretty good laugh later on about that whole episode.
I can remember an event in Sedona where we were introducing another product, and then we were having dinner at night and out under the stars, so to speak, and we went off and got the Viper and roared down the street with the Viper, and just to see what the reaction was going to be. And of course it just blows everybody away to be able to see one of the very early prototypes. I mean, it was just extremely crude, but that confirming the rumor that this was going on inside the company, and which was just wonderful.
The Viper captured the raw, irreverent personality of its forebearer, the Cobra. But it had also done something inside of Chrysler, something much more valuable to the corporate infrastructure.
Carroll Shelby doing the Cobra back in the 60s, and what we did with the Viper here in the 80s and 90s really was something that was very similar to what Carroll tried to create back in the 60s, and that was a team of individuals that were a little bit on the edge, if you will, in terms of what they tried to do with the Cobra. And we've done kind of the same thing with the Viper. So I think there's a lot of parallels there. If you look at the team approach, if you look at the motorsports activity, a lot of the fame from the Cobra came from the racing in the early days, SCCA racing out on the West Coast, and then in Europe later on with Le Mans, those kind of things. And if you look at what we've been doing with the Viper, similar type of approach. Obviously, we just won Le Mans this year, which we're very proud of. Last year, the FIA GT2 Championship in Europe. But beyond that, we're now starting to do SCCA racing here in this country. So if you go to a weekend event at one of the local tracks, you'll start to see some Vipers there in the T1 class. So a lot of parallelism between what Carroll did back in the 60s and what we've done.
When Dodge Vipers began showing up at dealers for the 1992 model year, the avalanche of pre-production publicity ensured that their arrival would not go unnoticed. Carroll Shelby himself had helped drive up the curiosity for Dodge's newest sensation by pacing the 1991 Indianapolis 500 in a Viper. Vipers were the best insurance a Dodge dealer could bank on to get people into a store. Automotive magazines clawed at the opportunity to road test this new supercar, and the Viper became the most ubiquitous cover car in the modern era. And all of this unchecked hysteria was well-deserved when the Viper's test numbers began hitting the streets. The Viper could cash any check its knockout appearance could write.
It's a 0 to 60 car in 4.5 seconds, and with a few things we can trim it down to 4 seconds. It's roughly an 18-second 0 to 100 and back to 0 car. And virtually there's nothing on the street that will match those numbers.
The 1992 Dodge Viper.
The 1992 Viper RT10 was easily the most talked about new car of the year. Even the Corvette ZR1, which came to market in 1990 with the nickname King of the Hill, failed to ignite the kind of rampant excitement enjoyed by the Viper.
I think the proof and the real gratification came when we were at the end of the program. This was in like November of '91 when we were doing the long lead press stuff. And we were standing on the street in Beverly Hills where we did the launch of this thing at a nice hotel. And we had brought all of the journalists out of the meeting room down on the street, and the Viper team was taking the group around the car. And I was just standing in the background. I'd already done my little pitch. And down the street was walking this gentleman who was just a bystander just coming down the street and walks down the street and he says, "Wow, looks like a Cobra." And I said to myself, that's it. We captured, what we wanted to do. And I think we all had that feeling all along. Yet, there was nothing there that would give you that exact cue, because any graphic element, any element of the vehicle per se is quite different.
And while the ZR1 was unquestionably a world-class sports car and the mightiest production Corvette ever built, it was a car that shared little with the Viper recipe.
When you look at the two cars, they are really a lot different. They seem to fit in the same segment, but they're designed under two completely different philosophies, I think. They're both great cars, but the Viper really truly gives you that, how can I put it, adrenaline rush, I think, when you get in the vehicle that you just can't get in any other vehicle. It truly gives you that heart-pounding feeling that gives you some of the sense of what we used to do, I think, in the automotive industry in the United States back in the late, mid to early 70s, with the sheer rush of the torque and the power of the drivetrain. Yet it does have the finesse and handling and durability of everything that technology can give you today, and obviously credit to that, the win at Le Mans this year. So I think it's a completely different car for different reasons, done under a whole different design concept philosophy. So it's really hard to compare the two. Obviously, I'm a little biased towards our car because we think it's a world-class vehicle, and we've proven that on the racetrack.
Two aspects of the 1992 Viper's successful arrival into the Chrysler new product lineup were reflections of how differently Chrysler was now approaching, one, the challenges of building prototype-based automobiles in the shortest possible time, and two, doing so to the satisfaction of the federal government, consumers, and the corporate budgeteers.
Well, at the time we had a cycle time of about 4 or 5 years for any major product program, and one of the things we wanted to do was change this culture and change this whole idea about how quickly we could respond to the market, and that's why this one was such a great test culturally for what we were doing in the company. And we've often said that this new platform team approach was a way for us to dramatically shrink the time from concept to market. And of course, we debuted the car in January of '89, and at the beginning of '92, we had a vehicle in the marketplace. And that was one of the things we tried to do, is have that relatively short time period for gestation. And this was one of those tools that helped us learn, and it's one of those reasons why the Viper was so much more important as a symbol inside the company than the tangible product itself. I know that sounds silly to a lot of people out there, but I think a lot of us were looking at it with that in the back of our minds, because anytime you break the paradigms, this helps you learn how to do things with your processes for the next program and for more mainstream programs. And that's certainly helped our company change the way we innovate in the form of product. You can never make everyone happy on every day, but I think when we just kept rolling over the obstacles, we were just determined that we were going to make it work, and I think it takes that single-mindedness to make something as unique as it was for its time happen. And we had to establish a new process for niche vehicle production. We had to come back with a way and offer a way to try to do something in a way that broke every paradigm that we might have in terms of how we manufacture things as a company, and even how we go about doing them. But I think the one thing that really helped this is, as we were mentioning earlier, is that this thing being a symbol for change within the company caused it to have an awful lot of cheerleaders looking down and looking into that project.
And what about those who felt that the gamble Chrysler was taking was going to slice away at the bottom line by building such an over-the-top sports car in small batches, in an assembly plant unique to the car, and filling a niche that was a departure from what the company had the greatest amount of experience in?
With any project like Viper, there's always naysayers. There's always going to be people who, for very good reason, by the way, would point out that, well, gosh, the returns aren't that good, or if we measure this classically, perhaps in financial terms, or if we measure this even classically in terms of what we're trying to do with very responsible things like corporate average fuel economy or all of those things. I mean, this doesn't exactly look like a great contributor in some instances, but you have to weigh all of that with a certain sense of balance and a certain sense of what you're trying to do with the company and the image of the company. And we always submitted that Viper would always get you back more with third-party credibility, with what we would get back from the journalists, or what we would get back from enthusiasts, or what we would get back in the form of just other companies using that as an icon to display their product even. If you tried to measure up all of the intangibles that came back from that, it would quadruple what we spent on the program. So I think you could make a financial case, but none of it was hard lined. You couldn't go back and line by line account this. It was, a lot of it was on the soft side, but it's very real. And I think most of us, to a person inside the company from a management perspective, got behind it for that reason. There weren't a lot of naysayers. I mean, there were a lot of us, some of us, on both sides of the fence. I mean, there's days when you think, gee, I hope this is the right thing to do. But I think in our hearts we knew it was.
At the new Mack Avenue assembly plant, 1992 Vipers were being built as quickly as orders were being received. And yet, it was still not fast enough. Sales were beyond peak.
In 1992, when Dodge came out with the car, they only built 276. The average Dodge dealer doubled the sticker price. Cars were exceeding $100,000 plus. So initially, I don't think the public was really excited about paying double sticker for a car, but prices came down to normal list prices as the years evolved, and now the car can be bought for a normal sticker price.
In terms of the numbers, we were sold out for a long time. We had to limit production. Of course, that brings out some of the worst in some instances where you see the price of them go up. But eventually, as we start to gauge and the ability to catch up with production, that's come back into line, fortunately.
There was a pent-up demand for it when it initially came out. The few that they did build, they sold immediately, so nobody knew where this car was going to go as far as production or as far as image. There were so few cars in '92 that you didn't even see them on the road. So it was kind of hard in the initial year of 1992 for Dodge to decide how successful this car would be. They knew that they were selling as many as they could build, so it probably took '93 and then maybe into '94, where they built over 2,000 cars, to really know the type of niche that they had established in the market.
Every one of these owners and every one of this extended family is confronted when you park the vehicle. It's almost impossible to go any place and be able to do it in a certain time frame. When you roll up with the Viper, you're going to be confronted with people that want to talk about it, and you have to plan that time into doing something with the vehicle. And of course, that's a wonderful problem. I think it's a wonderful problem for the owners. It's certainly an extroverted type of vehicle, and it was always intended to be that brash, bold, back to basics type of thing that elicited that spirit.
While the Viper RT10 Roadster was everything advertised, there was still a segment of disenchanted enthusiasts who weren't ready for the sacrifices required in owning a car with little protection from the elements. Unknown to most outside of Chrysler, a Viper Coupe had been sketched out not long after the Roadster version was proposed. With a silhouette and paint scheme borrowing heavily from the Cobra Daytona Coupe, the Viper GTS was as big a sensation as the Roadster, if not more so, when it went into production for the 1996 model year. With 450 horsepower and the kind of amenities more in keeping with grand touring cars, the GTS at $69,000 and the RT10 Roadster at around $57,000 could both be purchased together for less than what you have to pay for one Porsche Turbo Carrera 4.
The strong suits of the Viper obviously sit right square between the front wheels and under the hood. The V10 engine is really the power behind and the heart of the Viper, if you will, with its horsepower and especially its low-end torque. I mean, the real exciting part and to some extent the intimidating part of a Viper is the engine and the way that engine puts the torque to the rear wheels. So I would say that really the heart and soul is the engine. Followed closely, I think, by the spirit of the car, which is its handling characteristics, which are indicative of the suspension and the tires.
Gradual refinements to the Viper throughout the ensuing model years focused on driver and passenger comfort and convenience, along with additional choices of exterior paint color. But the overall style, shape, and prowess of the Viper have retained its most uncluttered of mission statements.
When you first kind of see the car and you're standing around getting ready to get into it, at first it's kind of intimidating. You don't quite know what to expect. You're sitting behind the wheel of something that's got a tremendous amount of torque, 460 odd horsepower, if you will. It's got tires that look like a race car. And so I think at first you're a little bit intimidated, but once you get behind the wheel of the car and start to get comfortable with the car, you kind of blend into it and you kind of get in the flow with the car, if you will. And having that much torque under your foot and then the way the car handles, just awesome, I guess is the best way to describe it.
Like the Shelby Cobra before it, the Viper was destined to not only snap heads around on the boulevards of America, but to become a presence on the endurance road courses of the world.
You could consider that as early as 1989 and as late as 1992, because with the level of engineers, designers involved in this project, the enthusiasm levels obviously are different depending on which engineer or designer you talk to. The reality of it is we started really looking at it from the platform team environment, and this was the first vehicle that really brought the platform team concept to Chrysler Corporation. Once we realized what an asset it was, the next element of that asset was to develop the fullest potential of the engineers and designers. And that's why in probably late 93 and early 94, the decision was made that it would be a good idea to research the concept of racing the car in the endurance environment. And late in 94, we began testing that. And in 1995, the vehicle actually did go out and do some testing in the local environment. In 1996, we actually did start endurance racing in Europe. The Viper's national and international racing record is not too complex, actually. We haven't done a lot of racing in the U.S. with it because sports car racing and endurance racing in general at this level has not really solidified in the U.S. marketplace and isn't as strong as it is globally. So our international record, we feel, is very good. We have won last year the FIA GT2 championship for both the manufacturer and the driver's championship. And we're the first U.S. manufacturer ever to have done that. And recently, just in 1998, we are the first U.S. manufacturer in 29 years to win the prestigious 24 Hours of Le Mans in GT2 with the Viper. And frankly, back to a previous question, it's the first U.S. production-based vehicle ever to win that race.
It is almost uncanny that the Viper should win the most prestigious sports car race in the world so shortly after its racing debut. In much the same way that the Cobra won the World GT Championship in but its second full year of international competition.
A few years ago, and it was just before we started and announced that we were going to go to Le Mans, a magazine and a gentleman writing for that magazine came in to interview myself and a couple senior executives at Chrysler here in Detroit. And we were asked the question, as I was asked today, what's important about this program? And my response to him was the same answer, that our people and our process and our product were critically important, and almost more important than winning on Sunday and selling Vipers on Monday. And very quickly the gentleman said to me, well, how could you possibly think about going to Le Mans if you don't think you could win? My answer back to him very quickly was, if we don't win, does that mean we lose? He said to me, I'll probably grow hair before you guys qualify for that race. Well, all of that is history today, and I can tell you that a group of us got together with one of our senior executives and went to a local pharmacy and purchased a product that you use to grow hair, and sent it to him and congratulated him on his comments and wished him luck in his future interview endeavors.
But what kind of future awaits the Viper? Could the fickle dynamics of the marketplace endanger this benchmark sports car that has perhaps only slightly tapped into its vast potential?
I really feel that Dodge would never drop this car because of the niche that it's created in the market. With the Viper clubs, there are Viper clubs throughout the country. They have events on a monthly basis normally. Dodge has a national convention where hundreds and hundreds of Vipers and Viper owners show up. It's just a niche that I feel that won't go away for a lot of reasons. Mainly because Dodge likes this part of the market. They like the people that they've attracted to their product, and it just seems like something that they will never let go.
Everyone has a different view of how it happened. I mean, if you asked everyone, what the genesis of it was, I think the important thing is that when we all came together to make the critical decisions, when we all came together to offer the support and find a way, and where we had to go off and break down a few walls to get something done, it was that symbol for change within the company, and that's critical almost any time you have an undertaking or a major program.